For a lot of voters, the central issue in this election campaign is the condition of our most loved institution, the National Health Service. But these have not been easy years for the NHS or those working in it, and the Health Secretary responsible for the NHS in England may have his work cut out, explaining why its future will be brighter under the Tories, and he joins me now. Good morning. We tend to bandy numbers a lot in these conversations. Let me start with a very simple question, which is, if I wake up in the middle of the night and I've got some pain inside me and I'm rushed to A&E, how soon should I be seen?
Well, the standard says that you should be seen within 4 hours, not just seen, but also treated and either discharged home or admitted to hospital.
Okay. When was the last time the NHS in England hit that target?
Well, we haven't hit it for over 2 years. It's not acceptable.
Another good example of how the NHS is performing or not performing is the 18-week rule, which is that, again, if I'm in a GP's surgery, he says, I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Marr, there's something serious happened to you. You have to go into hospital for an operation or some kind of procedure. I will be seen within 18, I'll be there within 18 weeks. And again, can you remind us how many people are not seen within 18 weeks at the moment?
Well, the standard is 92%, and currently we are on 90%. But if I may say,
so in terms of people not being seen, that's how many?
That's a significant number. But let me just say, you've picked two examples. I don't think that is a fair reflection of the performance of the NHS.
Nobody is saying, and I'm certainly not saying that nothing is going well in the NHS. I'm not saying that at all. But those are both two rules that you set yourself. The 4-week rule and the 18-week, the 4-hour rule and the 18-week rule to be judged by, and you have failed on both of them.
But
370,000 people are now not seen within 18 weeks, and that number is going up very fast, 100,000 in the last year alone.
Well, they are very, very important standards, but they aren't the only standards. And let me tell you another
standard. They're important to the humane working of the NHS.
Absolutely.
But here is the Royal College of Physicians saying our NHS is underfunded, underdoctored and overstretched. Patients are waiting longer on lists, on trolleys, in emergency departments and in their homes for the care they need. An increasing number of people, although clinically ready to go home, cannot safely leave hospital as the care system is unable to cope. People's lives are being put at risk. That's the Royal College of Physicians. That's not the BBC or anybody else. It's a very, very serious assessment of where the NHS is under Jeremy Hunt.
And what has Jeremy Hunt and what has this government been doing about that? Because I agree we need more doctors, and since I've been Health Secretary, we've actually got 6,500 more doctors. We've got 15,000 more nurses. And on the funding issue, I think this is the really
this is what
crucial...
I want to come to, absolutely.
Yeah, OK, well, let's talk about that for a moment. So we did have a very difficult period straight after 2010, after the financial collapse. We had the austerity period. But then, towards the end of that period, as soon as we were able to, as Conservatives, because we are absolutely committed to the NHS, we want to be the party of the NHS. Since over the last 3 years, we're putting in an extra £6.5 billion a year. And the result of that is you're seeing an NHS which has got more funding, more doctors, more nurses.
But I put it to you, not enough. I mean, you've got a real problem of pay in the NHS. Nurses who have had 7 years of pay freeze. I put it to the Prime Minister that the Royal College of Nursing says that nurses are having to go to food banks at the moment. And she said there were complex reasons why people go to food banks. Are there complex reasons why nurses have to go to food banks?
Well, let's look at the facts. The minimum a nurse can be paid in this country is £22,000, £27,000 in inner London. That assumes they do no night shifts or antisocial hours, which in practice most of them will. The average pay for nurses is £31,000, which is more than
by
the
11% in real terms.
Well, we don't agree with those numbers, but that's still, they're getting paid more than the national average. But is that enough? Considering the brilliant work... No, you've got to let me answer the question. Is that enough considering the brilliant work that they do? I think many people would say we want to pay them more. I think they do an incredible job. So if you want more money, and you've asked me this before, if you want more money to go into the NHS, and this government recognises we will need to put more money into the NHS and social care system because of the pressures we face, then the question is how you get there. And there is a non-NHS issue that overshadows everything, which is the Brexit negotiations, and I'm sorry to come to this, but it's very, very important because...
I'm delighted you're coming to it.
Because if we don't get a good Brexit outcome and we don't protect the economic recovery, the jobs that so many people depend on, whose taxes pay for the NHS. If we get a bad Brexit outcome, that would be a disaster for the NHS. And the choice that people face is, do they want a strong Theresa May doing those very difficult negotiations? We've got 27 countries lined up against us. Some of them appear to think that for the EU to survive, Britain must fail. And we need a strong Prime Minister, or do we want Jeremy Corbyn, who can't even get his own party to agree on Brexit?
Let me interrogate that a little bit. In terms of the good deal that you say this country must have for the NHS to thrive, presumably that does not include no deal. Would no deal damage the NHS badly?
Well, we've been very clear that no deal is better than a bad deal.
And I'm asking you whether no deal, leaving without an agreement, would damage the NHS, in your view.
Well, we want a deal. We think
That's not
a
my
deal...
question.
Well, no, let me answer very directly. We think a deal, getting a good deal, would be better for the NHS, better for the economy, better for jobs, better for all of us. But we also recognise that a bad deal would be bad for the country, bad for our long-term future, and we're not prepared to say that we will get a deal at any cost. And the real question, though, is...
But with respect, I'm sorry, with respect, what you're really saying is good and bad is bad. And what I'm asking you is, if we don't get a deal, is that bad for the NHS?
Well, you're showing a lot of respect to me this morning, and thank you for that. But I would just say this, that what I'm saying very clearly is an answer to your question, Andrew, which is I'm saying that a good deal would be best for the NHS, but obviously a bad deal would be the worst possible outcome for all our public services, because it would be bad for the country. Now, the question is,
you could answer this whole thing very straightforwardly. I've got an idea for you, which I picked up from the side of a bus. We're paying, according to the official figure, something like 18 billion over the next few years, 12 billion per year over the next few years to the EU. We could take that money and we could spend it on the NHS. And you could go to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, you could say, that's what we need for the NHS. I'm on the front line, I know that's what we should be spending, and that's what we should be promising the British people during this election campaign.
Well, what we're promising the British people is the credible promise that if we want, as this government has shown, an extra, $6.5 billion in the last 3 years alone in the NHS, if we're going to continue putting more money in, then we need that good deal, that strong economy. We're not going to promise stuff that we can't deliver.
What we actually said was a significant amount of it will go to the NHS, and that is essentially down to the government, but I actually believe that is what was pledged, and that's what should happen. So
that £350 million will go to the NHS?
That money will go, well, there was talk about it going to the NHS, but there are also other bits and pieces like agriculture and stuff, which is part of that process. So that is the divide up. It was never total, but it is a commitment, and it's a commitment that should be stand by.
What I want is funding for the NHS to be able to do that new technology. And I know that with a strong Theresa May battling for Britain against those other countries, we have the best chance of getting that deal. And
it's looking pretty cantankerous at the moment. I mean, it's been a very, very cantankerous week on both sides. And a lot of people looking at this think, do you know what? What I don't want is a punch-up. I want a proper grown-up negotiation with mutual respect and so forth. I don't want a punch-up, and I don't want to hear Juncker saying one thing and Theresa May coming back at him.
I deeply respect the British Prime Minister. I like her as a person.
Threats against Britain have been issued by European politicians and officials. All of these acts have been deliberately timed to affect the result of the general election that will take place on the 8th of June.
Can I ask whether the Cabinet understands why and how the European Commission is trying to interfere and rig our election campaign?
Well, I think it's very plain for everyone to see, and I think that because Brexit is the significant issue that overshadows everything in this election, that it's a decision that's made by the British people. And what people can see is that Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the SNP have all said they disagree with Theresa May's approach.
So
every vote for Theresa May, what we're saying is every vote for Theresa May will strengthen her hand in those negotiations, because they will say to the Europeans who are causing us some of these problems that the country is foursquare behind Theresa in getting the best deal for Britain.
And she said that they were deliberately interfering in this country's election to produce presumably what you think is that they're interfering to help Jeremy Corbyn against the Prime Minister. Is that the allegation?
Well, I think, they didn't have to leak these reports to newspapers of dinners that happened in the middle of an election campaign.
Sure.
And
why did they do it?
Well, it is the wrong approach to negotiations. We want good negotiations, we want a good outcome.
I'm sorry, the Prime Minister said this was about trying to fix our election. And I'm just asking you, how are they trying to fix our election and in whose favour?
Well, you know, you'll have to ask them why they chose to do that. But I think the answer is very clear, that they are trying to leak reports that undermine Theresa May's position. And I think what the British people know...
So they're trying to damage the Conservatives in this election?
I think what the British people know is it is for them to decide on this, not for people from other countries.
Are they trying to damage the Conservatives in this election, in your view?
Well, that must be the presumption. And what we're saying is that they should not be doing that, because this is an election for the British people to decide.
So the Commission is intervening in this election to try to damage the Conservative cause and therefore to benefit the opposition parties?
Well, we're saying we don't want that to happen. It shouldn't happen. And this must be a decision for the British people.